Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Ryan White. I'm a documentary filmmaker. This is my esteemed colleague and friend, Irene Taylor, the director of the beautiful film that you just watched. And I'm incredibly excited to be here and get to talk to you about it. I said to Irene when I watched it, I feel like it is such an unconventional celebrity documentary in the best of ways, and really expands a form that we have seen blown up so much over the last few years. And when I watched her film, it was so inspirational as someone who works in the same medium. And I'm excited to get to talk to you about it tonight. So my first question is, I think this is your first celebrity film. Can you tell me?
Let's just say I felt ill-equipped. Yes.
Can you tell me about the genesis of how this film came to be and why you decided to finally take that leap to making, a celeb doc is a little reductive, but a documentary about a megastar?
Well, first of all, hi, and thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it when people can see this writ large. So thank you for being here. I was actually a little uncertain about taking on this role. I knew there would be a long line of very competent filmmakers who would want to do this. And it's not that I didn't respect Celine. I wasn't particularly what you would call a traditional fan, but having just, I'm almost her age. We're about the same age. So I sort of came of age with her. And I remember times in my life when some of the big hits came out, and, I could remember that. And so I definitely felt like I could wrap my sensibilities around her, but I didn't know she was sick when I agreed to make the film. And that is because I was not told. I was not told because it's clear that she really didn't tell anyone. She told her closest circle around her, and I think no one really knew exactly how to handle the situation. And so when the prospect of making this film came about, which, as you can imagine, absolutely required Celine's full her cooperation, right? This wasn't something we were, plenty of celebrity docs are made. And that's a very interesting point of view. When the celebrity is no longer with us, they're dead, or the celebrity is not availing him or herself. That's also an interesting kind of celebrity doc, but this one was one that I knew from the get-go that I would make with her willingly on board. And so I thought at first I was ill-equipped to make just a fantastic story about someone with a fantastic life and a fantastic career. And I didn't really know how I would approach it. And so I can say this out loud because I've said it to Celine herself, which is that I had a certain degree of relief and gratitude when I was told that she was sick, because then I started to rest in my instincts a little better and just say, I'm just going to move along, because I was told, basically, Celine told me everything the very first day I was with her. In fact, she told me so much, it was more than we could ever put into a film, because it was
on
just
camera, right?
On camera the very first day. But I went into that first day knowing that she was sick, she was not herself. Whatever this illness was did not have a name. They didn't know what it was. And everyone, especially Celine, was very frightened. So I sort of entered into it with a reasonable amount of compassion. Just simply, well, let's just find out how she's doing, and I didn't know what to expect. So, the first day we showed up to film, I told her, I just want to be filming like the minute I see you. Like the camera's just going to roll. So you're not going to really have a proper introduction with my cameraman, who's probably the nicest person on the team, because he's going to be busy. But I wanted it that way. I just wanted the camera to be rolling from the first moment. And, I think she made it evident just in the way she presented herself, which was she was put together. She had a pressed blouse and a pair of pressed slacks, but hair pulled back in a simple bun, no makeup. And she was ready to just get real. It was very clear. And for the next year, I think that it really set the tone.
Was that interview that you're talking about, is that the first interview in the film? Because
the interview I'm talking about is not in the film.
Didn't even make it.
She was eating cornflakes.
So she made that decision to do no hair, makeup, and just just show up and be on camera. Like that wasn't a conversation.
No, definitely. I had no idea what I would encounter. I mean, I had met her, but I had met her through Zoom. It was the pandemic, so I hadn't met her in person.
I love the beginning of the film, and I love to talk to other directors about the beginnings of their film, because I know what that's like in the edit room, and at least for me, it's often the thing that changes the most. And I didn't know what to expect when I watched this film. I had heard great things, and then from the very first few minutes, I was so entranced. And I wanted to ask you about, I want you to describe it yourself, but I kind of see it as sort of like two cold opens. There's sort of the archival one, and then there's the verite one, which is very raw with her sons asking her the question. So I wanted to hear your thoughts behind why you opened the film in the way you did, and where you were sort of planting your flag narratively and stylistically, because I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really notable that we got 600 hours of archival footage from Celine's personal stash. So it was, I would say, 1/2 family home videos, like 300 hours of home videos, and then another 300 hours of news clips, things that apparently had been recycled through the media for decades. But I purposely shielded myself from that. And that's in response to yet another question. So let me stick with the one you asked. But I think in terms of the beginning, I think I want to give my editor, I had 2 editors on this film. One was a French Canadian named Richard Cameau, who primarily edits narratives. And he's really got quite he really has credit repertoire of films. And I was surprised he said yes. I cold called him because I was aware of his films that he had edited. And most of his films he edited in French, but he had not edited any documentaries that were, I would say, in the style that I would make a film. So he had made one documentary, for example, on the Cirque du Soleil, and he's French Canadian, and Cirque du Soleil is French Canadian, and he was very happy to do it. And that is really why he took on this film. He said, well, I don't know documentaries, but I mean, Celine, she's our queen. He grew up about 20 miles from where she grew up. So he did it because he wasn't a fan. He was just someone who really wanted to help shape a story about her. And what he said to me from the get-go was, Irene, I think it's important that we surprise people. And so in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the film, I thought I wanted to just show her in various iterations, certainly iterations of her that I was not familiar with, because I did not approach this as a fan, as someone who had tracked each album and the release and the milestones in her personal life. Like, I didn't learn about those until I talked to her about them. And I did that by design, because I do believe that you can only ask a question the first time once. Yeah. And then you never don't have that chance again. And so I tried to make the first 10 to 15 minutes just feels surprising. So I pulled different aspects, or not different aspects, different times in her life. And I also really wanted to get right out there in the beginning of the film that this was basically about a woman who felt very guilty about lying to people for as long as she did. Mm-hmm. And that really became, I think, what my North Star was that she needed, I think her motivation, like I said, she cooperated with this film, and that doesn't always happen, right? But so I often ask myself, what's her motivation? And I think her motivation was to come clean, and I mean, it's very forgivable what she lied about, but like she really felt very worried about how that would come across.
I think that's when I'm saying it's unconventional too when it comes to celeb docs. I mean, I see your fingerprints all over it, of your style as a director, and I'm so glad it was brought to a celeb doc. But what I found so surprising when I watched it was that this wasn't your traditional bio doc, and that Celine was still participatory in that. And my next question was going to be about the editing. Really, when it came to that, it really, what I loved about it, and I think makes it so unconventional, is it doesn't over-explain the biographical parts. And specifically, I'm talking about, like, for instance, Celine's upbringing, or you go into it, or Renee's death. These are beats that I know as someone who's kind of an outsider to Celine, a casual fan, and I wondered how you would treat it. And then when I watched the film, it was the editing that I felt like was so poetic in how you did those scenes that sort of blasted the conventions of biodoc. So I wanted to ask you how you dealt with those. Like, the verite is so powerful, but when you were thinking of like, well, I got to tell her family story and I got to tell how her husband died. How did you do those scenes? How did you approach them?
Well, and that is a burden when you're dealing with a public figure about whom so much is known, right? And so her illness, I did determine that really was the focus of the story I wanted to tell in this film. But the portion about her husband, I was quite stumped, actually. And Christian Jensen, who was the second editor, meaning in the sequence, Richard was able to take us up to the rough cut. And then from the rough cut to the end, the film changed very little. But there were key parts, namely the part about her husband, that Christian Jensen, who is not French Canadian, and lives in the mountains of Idaho, made with me more carefully. Like, we went through that part more carefully, and it's just really just a slice of the film. But I do feel like this is where the documentary gods just handed me on a platter this opportunity to film her recording the dub of her own voice in French for this film, Love Again. And because in the film she plays Celine Dion, she's able to say, oh, well, that's my husband, the late, Renee. She says it like this. And I thought, oh, maybe that's a little springboard. And I can just go and maybe just, if it's not offensive, to take a marriage of that magnitude, meaning that length of time, his earlier, formative part of her life, and really just limit it to a montage. And that's, I thought ultimately when I put it in the film as a whole, it felt tasteful, sufficiently tasteful. But it was tricky because I didn't want to tell the whole story. Mm-hmm. Because what is the story? I mean, depending on your point of view, if you follow Celine's life, the story of how she met her husband, there's so many different ways to tell it. Mm-hmm. And I saw a woman who was several years past his death, and she had so much respect and love for him and always tried to teach her boys like what a wonderful man he was. So I tried to honor that.
Yeah, I thought it was such a poetic way of doing it. And like I said, her upbringing as well was so beautifully told without feeling like a cradle to grave type of documentary. I want to ask you about the big scene that everyone has been talking about even before I saw the film. But I wanted to ask about the scene that the press was talking about so much, which is one of the final scenes, which is when Celine has, I don't know even what you call it, an episode of stiff person syndrome. What was it like to shoot that scene? And especially, what was it like to choose if you include that scene in the edit?
So that day happened about 8 months into filming. So by that point, our relationship was very ingrained. We really understood each other quite well. And Celine just continued to say to me, don't ask me if you can film something, just film. If I don't want you to film, I'll tell you. That actually never happened. I mean, she just said, follow me anywhere you want. My DP followed her into, her beautiful, beautiful bathroom with floor to ceiling windows. And it's where she kept her medication. And it's also where she just went to wash her hands and brush her hair. And she was happy to have us follow her in there. So there wasn't any sensitivity for us to follow her into, say, a physical therapy routine. We would just she did it every day. But this day was very different. And I do want to say it was the most uncomfortable I've ever been as a filmmaker filming a moment. And it wasn't because I was saying, should I be filming this or not? And I know that may surprise you. Like, I really knew that I was entitled to film it. She had told me this over and over again. And just because you film something doesn't mean it goes in the film. It's good to go through with what you're doing. But it was because I genuinely didn't know if she was okay in the beginning. And so I actually was sound girl that day. And I had, as I usually was, I held a boom pole with a microphone on the end, and I had that right up next to her face. We had a prime lens on, meaning you cannot zoom and make it longer or shorter focal length, and we were just filming a routine physical therapy appointment, and this happened in a matter of 2 minutes. There was no time to change the lens, so we were a little closer, meaning her face really feels right next to you, but that's because we had a 47 millimeter lens on and the room was only so big. So we couldn't really stand back. And so we basically filmed that, and I only knew that she was breathing because her assistant, her bodyguard, basically had her squeeze his hand. And then we knew because I could not hear her breathing through the boom pole, through the microphone. And I had it this far from her face and I couldn't hear it. And I was very worried. It was very upsetting. But so if you look at the raw footage, like you hear us kind of stumbling a little bit, but my DP, much to his credit, he looked at me. And once he had like the go ahead that this was the right thing to do. And if anything, he followed her into more intimate situations than I did, because I would routinely leave him alone with her. And I would hang back with a director's monitor and I could see what was going on. But so Nick spent more time with her alone than I did. And
so how long was that experience? I know
that episode lasted 50 minutes and you saw 5 of it. Yeah. And I will say that I showed her the film. Of course, there was no question that I would not show her the film, because after that happened, if there was any question, I wanted to show it to her. After that happened, I knew it would be imperative, ethically imperative, but just also as a human, I had no idea how she would react because she didn't remember very much of it. She never asked me to see the raw footage. To this day, she's never asked to see it. She doesn't have an interest to see it. But when I showed her the film, which is the film you saw tonight. Like, that is the film I showed her. And she said, do not change that scene and do not cut it. Like, do not cut it down, do not cut it out, do not change it. And she said, I think this will help me. And it helped her explain her disease to her kids. It helped her feel validated because she had been suffering these episodes for 17 years. And she didn't think people believed her. So.
And we need to wrap up, so I'm going to ask one more question,
goodness.
and then there is a reception. So we hope everyone will come to the reception, and you can ask Irene questions. But I wanted to ask about your relationship with Celine, making the film, but also especially now that the film has come out. Especially as someone, if you've seen Irene's previous films, they're not about celebrities, as I said at the beginning, and they're a lot about your family, your parents, your children. A lot of your one of your last films, Moonlight Sonata, was about being a mom. I felt like motherhood showed through a lot in this film. In Celine, like the focus was, I feel like, on the disease and motherhood. So I wanted to ask about that part of the film, but also your relationship with her, because it's always a tricky dance with your subjects, whether they're famous or not, if they're your friends, if they're your subject, if they're happy with the film, if they're not happy with the film. How's the relationship, and what's the latest? Is she happy with the film?
Yeah, as I said, I don't want to speak for her. That's why I'm hesitating a little bit. But she has, to me directly, called me a friend. She has said publicly that she considers me a friend. But at the same time, I think we both understand we were put in each other's lives for a reason. And that was not a commercial reason. I think she wanted to make this film, or I should say she was ready to make this film because she was living during the pandemic. She was not on tour. She could not be on tour. And she was getting her baseline self back on track. In other words, if I get rid of all of these palliative drugs I've been taking, such as Valium, for many years, what's my baseline? So she was discovering her baseline. And she decided very bravely, I would add, as a fellow human being, I'm going to ask someone to come in at the most vulnerable time in my life. The most vulnerable time. And I'm going to just give her carte blanche and tell her to go anywhere I go. And if I want her to stop filming, I will. And she never told me to stop filming. So that tells you how ready she was. You know, so we don't call each other on a weekly basis and say, hi, honey, how are you doing? We don't do that now, but she knows always how to reach me. I know always how to reach her, and we do communicate. And when the film came out, we did talk quite a bit beforehand about, you know, I specifically, because she made no demands of me making the film and did not ask me to adjust things or just the tone in that scene, you know, she never did anything like that. When the film was about to come out, I did say to her, is there anything that would be me going too far? And she said, Irene, I trust the way you've made this film is really, it really lets me know that you'll withhold what needs to be withheld and you'll say what needs to be said. And, you know, and like I said, that first day that I was there, she was very eager to tell me so many things. And the odd thing is none of that interview actually ever went into the film. You know, and it's kind of a sacred thing, you know, because I saw how much she wanted to express it. But I think over the next months, I think it does come across that she really was also seeing the film as a way to communicate to her fans because she was really grateful for them. That is for sure. And not every celebrity is like that, you know.
No, I was going to say I don't use this word lightly. I think it's a brave film. It's brave on her part. It's brave on your part. I think it's brave on Amazon's part to do an unconventional celebrity film, and It was just so incredibly moving. So congratulations. Thank you to the IDA for hosting this screening. Thank you, Amazon. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Celine, wherever you are.
Thank you, Ryan.
And congratulations. We'll see you all at the reception.
Thank you so much for coming.